faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we'll explore the book Like a Comet Streaking Across the Night Sky. If you enjoy American political dramas like House of Cards or The West Wing, or follow international news, you'll find these scenes familiar. Lawmakers from various U.S. states clash fiercely during sessions, neither side yielding an inch. During presidential elections, Republican and Democratic candidates take turns promoting their political platforms. But did you know, over 200 years ago, congressional sessions and presidential elections were nothing like this. Back then, lawmakers could repeatedly vote on the same issue. Someone who initially agreed might change their mind and disagree moments later. Presidential elections followed virtue politics. Voters elected leaders based on perceived moral character. So, how did American politics transform into its current form? Today's book, Like a Comet Streaking Across the Night Sky, holds the answers. The author, Linda, is the pen name of a Chinese-American couple, Qi Young. Linda's most influential work is the essay series, A Close Look at America, exploring U.S. politics, culture, and society. This four-volume series includes three previously covered titles: Worries from History's Depths, Presidents Are Untrustworthy, and I Too Have a Dream. Today, we conclude the series with Like a Comet Streaking Across the Night Sky. The book details the 1787 Philadelphia Constitutional Convention that established America's modern political system, an achievement celebrated as the Great Compromise. We'll explore this book through three sections. First, going solo doesn't work. This examines why America convened the Constitutional Convention. Second, how was the Great Compromise achieved? This covers events at the Constitutional Convention. Third, farewell to virtue politics. This discusses the convention's political legacy. All right, let's begin with part one. Going solo doesn't work. Going solo refers to America's 13 original states operating independently with minimal federal oversight. The 13 states, each going their own way. This happened because America's founders generally had simple democratic ideals. They believed that any government with more power and larger size becomes more prone to tyranny, and excessive freedom faces greater threats. So they originally aimed not for a big, strong government, but a small, weak one, leaving most matters to local people to manage themselves, preventing federal power from expanding and interfering too much with personal freedoms. This respect for individual liberty permeated the establishment of America's political, judicial, and other systems. The Revolutionary War didn't break out because colonists wanted to overthrow the British king. They hoped for representation in Parliament to protect their rights, but were refused. For instance, as we covered in Worries from History's Depths, that book introduces the U.S. Constitution's core idea: respect and protection for individual freedom. However, in early America, the practice of a small, weak government to protect personal freedom didn't work out. First, the federal government had too little power, couldn't collect taxes, and was too poor to maintain basic public services. At that time, some pioneers headed west, recklessly encroaching on Native American lands and frequently causing bloody conflicts. But the federal government had neither money nor manpower to deal with this. Second, conflicts between states were frequent. Before the Revolutionary War, American states each did their own thing, prioritizing their own interests with little care for others. After the war, theoretically, states should have cooperated to achieve common interests, but many economically stronger states still acted independently, unwilling to compromise for others' benefit. For example, some states with seaports monopolized them, charging tolls to states without ports. New York State, for instance, heavily tolled New Jersey, who then complained to the federal government. But the federal government lacked supporting laws, was weak, and couldn't intervene, leading to internal strife, and external threats. In the 18th century, America was surrounded by colonies of European powers like Britain, France, and Spain, all eyeing this new nation covetously. Um, Moreover, these European countries could tell the US federal government had weak enforcement power, so they basically dealt directly with state governments. Um, this was very disadvantageous for a new nation. In this situation, the federal government effectively didn't get formal recognition internationally. The country, having just gained independence, faced the risk of falling apart. That concludes the first part. From this section, we learned that early America didn't build a strong federal government to protect individual freedom, yet the nation seemed on the verge of collapse. So, after 4 years of weak government experiments, in 1787, most U.S. states realized they must find a way to establish a powerful federal government. Thus, they decided to each send representatives to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to hold a historic meeting. This was the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. So, next we officially enter part two, the Great Compromise, to specifically discuss how the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention achieved it. And how did this meeting lay the groundwork for America's modern political system? The Philadelphia Convention officially opened on May 25th, 1787, with 55 delegates gathering in the City Hall, which is also where the Declaration of Independence was born. These delegates were directly appointed by state governments, with about 4 representatives per state. Although the 4 years of weak government practice caused many domestic and foreign issues, it also enabled democratic experiments at the grassroots level. Most of these delegates had served as state legislators for years, with extensive political experience and a strong sense of responsibility to society and the people. The Philadelphia Constitutional Convention holds a crucial place in American history because it established the foundations of U.S. politics. For example, it formally set up the U.S. government's separation of power structure, including principles of mutual balance and checks among executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It also drafted the U.S. Constitution. The preamble and 7 articles we read today were created at this convention. However, such an epic-making important meeting initially faced opposition from many ordinary citizens, because many people didn't realize the various problems America faced were tied to the small, weak government situation. On the contrary, they thought that once the government got strong, it would impose more taxes and oppress ordinary folks. To ease public concerns, Delegate James Madison persuaded George Washington to chair the convention. Washington was the chief commander of the Revolutionary War, revered as the founding father of America. He was a true gentleman, pursuing moral perfection, known for his reserved nature and rigorous self-discipline. Despite his immense social prestige, he never permitted himself the slightest impropriety. After the Revolutionary War victory, some of Washington's subordinates proposed making him king to establish a new monarchy. Washington firmly rejected this suggestion, relinquished military command, and returned home as a private citizen. Thus, in America at that time, virtually no one questioned Washington's character and morality. This constitutional convention, Washington initially didn't want to participate either. Persuaded by Madison, he went to Philadelphia but mostly remained silent. Perhaps he felt his prestige gave him extra influence. Once he spoke, others might hesitate to voice differing opinions. Against this backdrop, the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention convened. To ensure smooth proceedings, he adapted discussion rules from the British Parliament. These rules primarily comprised 2 major aspects. First, rules about addressing the chair and equal speaking time. Addressing the chair meant delegates must stand when speaking, facing the chair as their audience. referring to others in third person when mentioned. This way, even with opposing views, speakers address the chair positively rather than arguing directly with opponents. The traditionally neutral chair acted as a firewall, preventing heated clashes between conflicting opinions. Equal speaking time meant identical time allocation per person per topic. Delegates spoke in sequential rounds, maintaining courteous and polite discourse. No standing, walking, reading books or newspapers while others spoke. The second aspect, Philadelphia Convention's hallmark, was the repeated voting rule. Any passed motion could be reopened for reconsideration. For instance, if, as a delegate, you voted yes on an issue, but later thought, that doesn't feel right, you could still change your vote. This rule might seem self-defeating. At first, it allowed delegates to constantly shift positions, causing contentious issues to drag on endlessly. One proposal was even voted on over 70 times. What was the point? But in reality, this rule proved crucial to the Philadelphia Convention's success. As we discussed earlier, America faced internal crises and external threats, with deep divisions between states. Every step forward sparked disagreements. Without thorough debate and repeated voting, true balance of interests would have been impossible. States feeling severely disadvantaged might have rejected outcomes after the convention, shattering hard-won consensus. Reconvening everyone later would have been nearly impossible. To prevent this, every state's voice needed full respect during proceedings to reach genuine compromise. These rational, democratic rules made the convention remarkably productive, achieving historic outcomes like those mentioned earlier. Beyond drafting the Constitution and establishing separation of powers, it resolved the most critical issue: congressional representation, later hailed as the Great Compromise. Now let's examine what made this Great Compromise so significant. Congress is America's legislative body, where lawmakers create national policies. Each state's number of congressmen determined its influence over national affairs and ability to protect state interests. Thus, states fiercely disagreed over representation methods. The 13 states varied enormously, not just in size, but critically in population distribution. Virginia, an early state, was large with 740,000 residents. Georgia was small with just 50 to 60,000 people, less than 1/10 Virginia's population. Delaware's population was even smaller, just 1/16 of Virginia's. Essentially, America then had 3 large states plus 10 small ones. Virginia's proposal: a bicameral Congress with proportional representation, House seats and Senate seats both allocated by population. Clearly, this proportional system favored large states over small ones. If representatives followed population ratios, Virginia would have 16 times more congressmen than Delaware. So small states fiercely opposed this plan. Small states countered. Every state should have equal representatives regardless of size, equal representation, to prevent big states from dominating. But implementing equal representation worried large states too. Remember, only 3 large states versus 10 small ones. With equal votes per state, small states could easily pass laws favoring themselves if they united, like shifting tax burdens onto large states, letting minorities overpower majorities. So large states also firmly rejected equal representation, deadlocking the convention. Then, Connecticut delegate Roger Sherman offered a solution. He proposed proportional representation for the House and equal representation for the Senate, 1 seat per state, a mutual concession to move forward. This became the Connecticut Compromise, Connecticut being a small state. Sherman's proposal essentially meant small states conceded first, yet large states still resisted this concession because proportional representation wasn't just beneficial. It symbolized power originating from the people. More people in your state, more votes you get. Like individual rights accumulating into a state's congressional power, whereas equal representation with one seat per state symbolizes national power's source, is delegated from the states to the nation, because regardless of population, each state is treated as a single entity, showing collective state rights in Congress but obscuring individual rights. This is a matter of principle, no easy compromise. So the three large states rejected the Connecticut Compromise. In this impasse, late June saw the convention's first vote on the Connecticut Compromise. With Rhode Island and New Hampshire absent, 11 states voted, resulting in 5-6 against the compromise. So you might ask, weren't large states the minority? How did they win that first vote? Well, besides the three large states, three small southern slaveholding states were present. Beyond small populations, they held fundamental cultural differences from northern small states. They feared powerful northern coalitions might interfere with southern slavery. And so these three southern states backed proportional representation, hoping to leverage their territorial advantages to eventually become large states and offset congressional disadvantages. But this large state favoring outcome was unacceptable to the five northern small states. They threatened secession if proportional representation was implemented. We'll stop being Americans. No, not just the convention, but the entire fledgling nation teetered on collapse. Every delegate's nightmare. Despite deep divisions, all shared one conviction: preserving the Union benefited every state. Georgia delegate Baldwin understood this profoundly. Though Georgia initially sided with large states, Baldwin realized its southern border with French or Spanish colonies made strong national protection essential. If no compromise happens now, northern small states will secede and the Union will collapse. This would leave Georgia isolated and vulnerable, soon swallowed by surrounding colonies. So for Georgia, what representation system the Senate adopts matters, but preventing northern states' exit and avoiding national disintegration matters more. Thus, during early July's second vote on the Connecticut Compromise, Baldwin alone switched positions. During Georgia's internal vote, he supported equal representation for the Senate. As mentioned, each state sent 4 delegates, but late June saw 2 Georgia delegates leave for New York on official business. So by the second vote, Georgia had only 2 delegates remaining. This created a 1-1 deadlock internally, 1 for, 1 against, nullifying Georgia's vote, resulting in a 5-5 tie that stunned everyone. Delegates realized the deadlock might finally break. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as everyone seized this chance to save the convention. States retreated from rigid positions, reopening discussions on the Connecticut Compromise for 10 intense days. On July 16th, the third vote on the compromise began. Massachusetts' vote was voided, and New York delegates abstained by returning home. Thus, the third vote ended 5-4. The Connecticut Compromise passed. Large states had finally conceded. On July 17th, the convention formally adopted it. Proportional representation for the House, and equal representation for the Senate. A globally unique system that broke the thorniest deadlock. The compromise between large and small states birthed the true U.S. government over 2 centuries ago. Americans call this compromise the Great Compromise and make it a fundamental part of civic education. They recognize that different social interest groups often conflict naturally, so everyone should have their representatives in Congress to voice demands, debate openly, and finally compromise to reach agreements. The progress of the entire society is built on these compromises and cooperations. This is the content of Part 2. The Philadelphia Convention was highly effective, largely due to the idealistic atmosphere in American politics at the time and the people who attended it. Whether from large or small states, they all had good hearts, viewing political participation as serving the public, not personal gain. But after the Philadelphia Convention, America's classical politics declined rapidly, and the modern political phase began. So finally, let's discuss part 3, Farewell to Virtue Politics. In this part, we'll mainly introduce how America's modern political phase began and how modern party politics formed. So, what exactly is virtue politics and why should we say farewell to it? Simply put, virtue politics was a political belief widely held by all levels of society in early America. This concept has strong features of Western classical politics, believing that political participation should be about dedication and public service, selecting the best people for government roles. For example, in presidential elections, they voted based on selecting good people, choosing those with the most dedication and highest morals. The person with the most votes became president, and the second became vice president. Later generations called this political concept virtue politics. It should be said that in early America, the political environment was very simple, with most participants being scholar, politician, allowing such an idealistic system to function for a time. For example, America's first president, Washington, and first vice president, John Adams, were such people, scholar politicians. After the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention in 1787, America quickly held its first presidential election. Washington was elected unanimously and inaugurated in New York City in the spring of 1789. Undoubtedly, at that time, Washington was the foremost good man in the eyes of all state representatives. After taking office as U.S. president, Washington formed America's first cabinet. This cabinet had only 4 secretaries: Treasury Secretary Hamilton, War Secretary Knox, Attorney General Randolph, and Secretary of State Jefferson. All 4 had served in the Revolutionary War. Washington considered them outstanding in character and ability, thus also qualifying as good men. Yet, even so, sharp political divisions soon emerged within this cabinet and across the federal government. A most prominent rift was between Treasury Secretary Hamilton and Secretary of State Jefferson, whose clashes over economic and foreign policies grew into direct opposition. Hamilton, a clear nationalist, advocated centralizing power in the federal government to build a unified, strong nation. Leveraging his economic expertise, he proposed rebuilding national credit and establishing a national bank to develop industry through credit systems. Jefferson, a more traditional politician, deeply feared Hamilton's nationalist tendencies, worrying federal expansion would threaten individual freedoms. Jefferson believed Hamilton's policies only benefited urban merchants and speculators, harming farmers and artisans, widening wealth gaps, and undermining fairness. Thus, 2 opposing political forces formed around them: the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were also called the Democratic Republicans. They split into 2 parties in the 1820s, today's Democrats and Republicans. Fundamentally, the parties differed in confidence and focus regarding building a modern economy like Europe's. Hamilton and his Federalists were confident in building an industrial society, eager to embrace challenges. But driven by economic rationality, they ignored those left behind by progress. Jefferson and his Anti-Federalists cherished an idyllic agrarian society, anxious about change. They emphasized policy morality and social equity. Objectively speaking, both positions were genuinely public-spirited and held valid reasoning. They each held different value at various stages of social development. But once these positions formed opposing parties, they became irreconcilable, with rhetoric and actions spiraling out of control, tarnishing classical politics' noble atmosphere. As federal power grew, so did its political stage. This attracted increasingly ambitious politicians who cared less about personal honor and integrity, marking a stark departure from the founding era's service-driven classical statesmen. Thus, from Late 1700s to early 1800s, American politics inevitably transformed into modern party politics. As mentioned, America practiced virtue politics, selecting presidents based on personal morality. By this standard, Washington served two presidential terms, both unanimously, while John Adams became vice president twice as runner-up. But Washington despised partisan politics and struggled with the emerging modern political landscape. In 1796, immediately after his second term, he firmly resigned despite pleas to continue. After Washington's departure, Vice President Adams was elected as the third U.S. president, with Jefferson, the runner-up, becoming the third vice president. Then Americans awkwardly discovered Adams, Federalist, and Jefferson, anti-Federalist, held completely opposing political views. This was unsurprising. Under party politics, both parties had similarly sized support bases. So, under good people elections, the top two vote-getters would likely be opposing party leaders. How could a president and vice president who constantly opposed each other possibly govern effectively? This severely hampered federal efficiency, causing repeated deadlocks. Thus, in 1804, before the fifth presidential election, America passed the 12th Amendment, ending the virtue politics model. This amendment stipulated separate votes for president and vice president, rather than a single vote. The top vote getter becomes president. The runner-up becomes vice president. Thus, each party would nominate both a presidential and vice presidential candidate. That, I think, as a coordinated campaign team, voters actually choose governing philosophies. Only same party candidates share consistent platforms. So same party candidates win or lose together. Today, while candidate morality still matters, party platforms and governing approaches are the primary standards. Different candidates' governance strategies. Thus, alternating party rule replaced early America's virtue politics as a modern political concept. Moreover, the concept of good evolved. Parties aren't moral or immoral, but represent different values and interests. That concludes part 3. In early 1800s America, virtue politics ended, transforming presidential selection. America's modern political era began with party politics. This concludes, like a comet streaking across the night sky. At the Philadelphia Convention, delegates achieved the Great Compromise through reason and democratic faith, establishing America's political foundation. This system is imperfect. Each era brings new challenges. The founders couldn't foresee everything, but believed in humanity's innate desire for freedom, creating institutions to protect it. The journey involves detours and setbacks, but nothing can stop the pursuit of freedom. Even on starless nights, they trusted the cosmos still shone, like a comet streaking across the night sky. Notes are below. Until tomorrow.